From January 1st, 2025, e-invoicing will be introduced step by step. What does that mean? If you are self-employed or run a business, it will be regulated in the future what file format you must use to issue your invoices. It is already regulated today what must be included in such an invoice. So, date, invoice number, service period, invoice recipient, service of the company, and so on. All of this is already regulated in the Value Added Tax Act. What has not yet been regulated is in which specific file format or format you actually have to issue these invoices, paper or PDF or in a Word file or written with a pen on a napkin. All of this is literally legally acceptable so far, until today. In the future, there will primarily be two invoice formats that you can use. One is the X-invoice and the other is the ZUGFeRD draft horse invoice. This will not fundamentally make invoicing easier. Many of you still actually write your invoices with Word or Excel, and that will change in the future. It will become increasingly difficult. Therefore, it makes sense to get an overview of how to actually issue your invoices in the e-invoicing format in the future. One provider I can recommend to you is Sevdesk. And Sevdesk has two options for how you can write your e-invoices. I'll show you that by taking you along on my screen. We are currently now on the Sevdesk website, specifically at sevdesk.de/e-invoicing generator. I will also put the link to it in the video description below. And this is a free e-invoicing generator. This means you don't even have to register, so you don't need a Sevdesk account to use it. And we scroll down here and then we see that there is an input mask. This means you can simply create an e-invoice here on the website. And if you are self-employed and are a bit annoyed by this e-invoicing obligation because unnecessary costs are arising and you only issue 2, 3, or 4 invoices a year, then a professional accounting program really isn't worth it. I completely agree with you. And if you can no longer use Excel and Word, what else can you use? And if you can, no. The answer is this e-invoicing generator. You can simply enter all your data on the website. Your name, bank account details, your address, the country, your email, your tax number, your phone number, and VAT ID. You can enter all the information about your customer here, the invoice date, the payment term, and write down which products or services you are invoicing for, and then you can actually create e-invoices here for free. Create. The problem with these generators is that an invoice usually doesn't exist in a vacuum. Rather, you often typically create it as part of the accounting. You also need to check somehow whether the invoice is paid, and you have to somehow report the VAT included in this invoice in a VAT advance return to the tax office. At the same time, this invoice increases your income in your income surplus statement, and you need this income surplus statement again to file your tax return. This means that essentially, and therefore, an invoice is not a completely detached document. And indeed, also the GoBD compliant archiving. You can create a document here which is legally acceptable. However, you must keep invoices in a way that they are unchangeable, meaning they must be audit proof. And you definitely have to deal with that yourself indeed when you use such a generator. My recommendation is, if you write 1 or maybe 2 invoices per month, then it is usually worth it to use a professional accounting program. It simply takes care of all the things I mentioned. And let's take a look at what creating an e-invoice looks like when you have a ZUGFeRD account. By the way, if you think that ZUGFeRD is a pretty good solution, then I can first tell you, yes, it is a really great solution. And secondly, take a look at the video description below. It is also displayed here. With the code Steuerfit50, you get a 50% discount on the subscription at Selvdesk. So check out the video description. We are now in my Selvdesk account. This means this is what it looks like when you log into Selvdesk. Here I can already see my income, expenses, and various overviews. But we want to write invoices. You can write invoices under the menu item Invoices. Who would have thought? Then I see an overview of the invoices created so far. And up here on the right, I simply and easily click on Create Invoices, and then I observe a form that closely resembles the form of the e-invoice generator. We can simply and very easily flip the switch up here, and then the invoice I create here will be an e-invoice. Let's take a look at what changes. Not much changes except for the customer's email address. This is also relatively logical because I can't print an e-invoice and send it by mail. This means that for an e-invoice I additionally need the email address, and I don't need anything more for now. And it's best if we do this together. And the nice thing about Selvdesk is that I can create my customers. Entering all the master data once means if I send a subsequent invoice, I don't have to fill it out again each time. and I simply just go to text digital GmbH here and I get a very nice message. It asks me if it wants to transfer the data. This means it recognizes that an invoice has already been issued to this customer. And that saves me a lot of time. This whole thing is not possible with any generators. And I can already see here text digital Hauptstraße 22 in Frankfurt am Main. The email address is still missing, so I'll just write it in here quickly. Up here on the right, we have some information that we can set. For example, the invoice date, which we can select here, such as November 5th, 2024, and then the delivery date, meaning the service date or the period. So if it was a longer period because it was for the service in October, I could now select the entire month of October. And then the service period is also correctly specified. Then I can enter the invoice number here. Important, the invoice number must be a consecutive number. And I can also set the system of the invoice number here with something like placeholders, variables, and then it basically uses my format for how I create this invoice. I don't need that. I'm perfectly fine with him doing it this way. I could provide a reference number so that my customers can assign it on their end. In my case, that's not necessary. And then the payment term. That means I simply and clearly specify here, for example, in 14 days or in 30 days, and then it adds that to the date here. Then there is the headline and the address and so on, and here he has already taken over some information. That means I have obviously already provided digitalization consulting for the company Text Digital GmbH 3 days, but in this case it is a month, which I have done as a flat rate, namely a flat rate of 1 month for I am expensive. Of course, I am expensive, 5,000 euros plus, 19% VAT. Now I could possibly also say 20% discount because I am not only expensive, but also nice, I attach to my customers. That means in total I charge 4,000 euros plus 19% VAT, which is 4,760 euros, because I can still write something nice in the footer here. And down here I can provide additional information such as the currency, whether I grant the account, whether it is a taxable service, whether it is an export in the community delivery, and so on. This is important to determine which revenue account this income will be booked to. In this case, it is simply taxable revenue. That means everything is already correct. I could now select the internal contact person here, and I can also directly specify a revenue account here. So if I simply want to use different revenue accounts for certain services, I could set that up in Sevdesk and then select the revenue account here. To my knowledge, Sevdesk is the only cloud accounting program where I can write in different revenue accounts myself, especially when I work with the tax advisor and he now says, well, I have a revenue account here. Here, the revenue account for the products is 44 Andro or 44 L1, and according to the standard chart of accounts L4, you could agree on that here or come up with your own system. And what is also possible is the cost center. So if you are working on different projects and have costs and revenues and you want to know not how your entire company is functioning, but individual projects, then you can assign cost centers and allocate your invoices and of course expenses to specific cost centers. And then you also have a cost center evaluation. This means you can also see how your projects are performing. I find that a nice solution, and you can also set how payments should be made. Most of the time in my case, it's just a regular transfer, so a SEPA transfer. And very, very important, especially in connection with e-invoicing, if you want to issue an X-invoice, you need a routing ID. A routing ID helps you to find the correct recipient at your customer. This means you need to obtain this routing ID from your customer. Personally, I recommend you in most cases, do not issue an X-invoice unless your customer requires it. For example, federal authorities or Deutsche Bank have already stated that they only want to accept X-invoices. However, if your customer gives you the choice, I would always recommend using the lead horse format for a very simple reason, which we will look at shortly. And when you write a lead horse invoice, you can simply leave this part blank. And that's actually it. This means we have very quickly created a comprehensive invoice to Text Digital for my detailed digital consulting in October 2024. And now I can take a look at it carefully. I can simply save it, or alternatively, I can send it directly and efficiently from Sevdesk. In the next step, we get a preview of the invoice. So this is what the invoice we created looks like. And here on the right side, I can first make it a bit nicer. So of course, add a logo. I can choose a layout. If I don't like it this way, I can choose something else here. Personally, I prefer it simple, so I will take the simple layout and then I can select further settings here. For example, if I want to print this invoice on letterhead, it's important to note that printing invoices will no longer be possible in the future. I can add a QR code, I can display a customer, contacts, show the sales tax per item, item number, and so on, such as. All of this is not so relevant for me right now. The exciting part is up here. How can I transmit this e-invoice now? of course, I can simply download it and then send it via email. And I already mentioned that we have two different formats. One is the lead invoice. A lead invoice is a combined file of a PDF and an XML file. And I get that when I simply just click on download here. It says here that the PDF invoice will be supplemented with a machine readable part. This means it is not just a PDF invoice, but a lead invoice, so a combined PDF and XML. We'll look at that shortly. However, you could also just download the XML file, and that would be the X invoice. This means you could also send that if, for example, you are sending your invoice to a federal authority or Deutsche Bank or whoever wants pure X invoices. However, you can also do it directly here from Sevdesk. Send it via email. Honestly, that's the most convenient option, and that's what I would recommend to you in the future. However, you can actually still send your invoice by post until 2027 or 2028 if you want to and are willing to spend the money on postage. At least you can save yourself the trip to the mailbox, because here you can actually send this invoice as a letter with just one click for 1.10 euros. And just a small note, you can also send invoices as paper documents forever if your customer is an end customer. So B2C sales, or if your invoice, meaning your invoice amount, is under 250 euros, then it is a small invoice and the e-invoicing obligation does not apply. However, my personal recommendation is to take the lead invoice and send it via email, because the lead invoice can be sent just like a PDF. Let's open it and we'll just do that. We simply click here to download and download the lead invoice. Now it tells me again that the invoice will be finalized upon downloading. Finalized means it is unchangeable. This is absolutely exactly what I said at the beginning, that this archiving is compulsory by law. And if you have a ZUGFeRD account, ZUGFeRD takes care of all the stuff. The invoice is now in my folder for invoices. That simply means RE1033. This is the invoice we just issued, point PDF. And now the question arises, how do I know that this is an e-invoice and not just a normal PDF? To find out, we will simply open this file, and of course we will see a simple PDF here. What makes this PDF an e-invoice? For that, let's take a look at the attachment. Specifically, the attachment in this PDF file. And there we see that there is indeed an XML format integrated in this PDF. And this XML format is called the ZUGFeRD invoice. And we click on that once and the XML file opens. This means that this is what the invoice looks like. A bit like computer code. And this code actually contains all the information. This means that if we take a look here, for example, Melchior Neumann, here we see my email address and so on. This means that all the information visible in the PDF document is also stored in the XML file. And this leads to the fact that accounting programs on the client side no longer have to guess or visually read what is on this invoice, but can simply and easily extract the information directly from the XML file. And this, at least the assumption and hope, will significantly accelerate the accounting process in the future. In summary, one can say that the e-invoicing obligation is no problem at all with Selbstdesk. If you only write an invoice occasionally every few weeks, you simply use the free e-invoice generator. But as soon as you actually have more invoices and also need to submit VAT reports and so on, I recommend simply getting a Selbstdesk account. With this Selbstdesk account, you basically just have to flip a switch and you can then create X invoices and pull invoices, basically. And of course also process incoming, X invoices and pull invoices without any problems. If you're just thinking, wow, that tool looked quite nice, click the first link in the video description or directly right here. And now you could directly subscribe to the channel or perhaps maybe watch another video, for example, and this one or this one.